Okay, great.
Yours will be on.
Testing? Great. Okay. You good, Juan?
Yep.
All right, mics are going on, everyone. Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome back to the Boston City Council chamber for our very first in-person committee hearing in a very long time, thanks to the State House not being able to get their regulations in order. So we are grateful to be here anyway, and I want to welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Wu. I'm chair of the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councillor Liz Braden and Councillor Ed Flynn and Councillor Kenzie Bach. I want to remind everyone that this public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at the City of Boston's website, as well as will later be rebroadcast on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. Please silence your cell phones and other devices, and I will read a few items into the record. Today's hearing is on dockets number 0102, 0103, and 0389. For the record, docket number 0102 is a message and order authorizing and approving the City of Boston's Conservation Commission to receive a property identified by the Boston Assessing Department as 0 Rivermoor Street in the West Roxbury neighborhood of Boston with a parcel identification number of 20-09228020. This property is currently under the care and custody of the Boston Planning and Development Agency and is located on the banks of the Cow Island Pond area of the Charles River in West Roxbury. Docket number 0103 is a message and order for your approval of the receipt of a preservation restriction agreement on the Aldrich House located at 59 Mount Vernon Street in Boston, Mass. 02108 by the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities doing business as Historic New England. And last but not least, docket number 0389 is a message and order for your approval to declare surplus city-owned former Boston Transportation Department parcels of land and transfer the care, custody, management, and control of said property to the Public Facilities Commission. This land is located at 18 Hamlet Street in Dorchester, Ward 7, parcel 0391600, consisting of approximately 1,450 square feet of vacant land and an unnumbered parcel on Hamlet Street in Dorchester, Massachusetts, Ward 7, parcel 0389400, consisting of approximately 34,270 square feet of vacant land. These matters are sponsored by the mayor and referred to the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. Would any councilors like to give any opening statements before we dive in? Okay, thank you. And I do want to mention before we dive in that, especially related to the first docket, our president pro tempore, Councilor Matt O'Malley, was hoping to be here, but Margot has, we're wishing her well, so they're making a quick trip to the pediatrician and hope all is okay. So I know he very much wanted to be involved in this one. So let's start with the West Roxbury parcel, and then we'll go in the order as mentioned. I don't know who's here for that one, but please feel free to introduce yourself and give your statements. Once it turns solid, it should, it'll be ready. There you go.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and Councilors. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Morgan McDaniel. I'm a Senior Real Estate Development Officer at the Boston Planning Development Agency. I'm also joined by Nick Moreno, Executive Director of the Boston Conservation Commission. As you mentioned, the Rivermoor property is located at 0 Rivermoor Street, West Roxbury, on the banks of Cow Island Pond in the Charles River. Unfortunately, I believe this is the wrong slide deck for this item. It consists of approximately 51,400 square feet of sloping, brush-covered vacant land. It's located in the middle of an urban wild under the custody and management of the Boston Conservation Commission. It is also a wetland and a FEMA flood zone. The Boston Redevelopment Authority acquired the parcel in a land swap on June 29, 2005. Since that time, the BPDA has maintained the parcel in its natural state to conform to the condition of the adjacent urban wild. The Boston Conservation Commission, in conjunction with the Boston Parks and Recreation Department, has requested to acquire, restore, and maintain this property as an extension of the Rivermoor Urban Wild for conservation purposes. And you can see on these slides coming up right now, you'll be able to see the location of the parcel. And next slide, please. Yep. And so there you can see the location of the parcel outlined in yellow. To the right is parcels currently owned by the City of Boston, and to the left are parcels owned and maintained by the federal government, and this is across from the City Archives building. And I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councilors. I want to extend the Commission's gratitude for holding this hearing. The Commission is very excited at the prospect of acquiring this parcel for incorporation into our urban wild. We thoroughly want to thank the BPDA as our partners in this as well. The Commission first had a discussion on this matter with the BPDA back in 2018. In June, the Commission held a hearing where we discussed the matter in the public, and we received some public comments in support of it at that time. And then last year in July, the Commission formally voted to allow our chair to sign the demonstration project, which was submitted to the BPDA board, which initiated the transfer from the BPDA to the Commission as well. We can move to the next slide. So these are just some pictures from the banks of the property looking out into the Charles and Cow Island Pond. It's a really scenic vista. You would never know you're still in Boston, just down the street from Millennium Park, looking out across the water into our intersection with our fellow municipalities, Dedham and further down road, Needham and Newton. So this particular property has been maintained over the years by the Conservation Commission, the BPDA, and the Parks Department through various urban wild cleanups, a lot of engagement from the community to maintain these properties. Very little maintenance is actually required, as they are pretty nice natural areas. But they do provide enormous benefit in terms of habitat for wildlife, as well as for storm damage prevention and flood control, given that they are part of the city's floodplain and protect the city and especially the City Archives building across the street from any potential impacts from flooding on the Charles. As Morgan had stated, the abutting property is owned by the federal government. It's specifically held by the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control along that extent of the river. And adjacent to the city's already held parcel by the Commission, that's DCR-owned land. So this would be the last piece to permanently protect that entire stretch of waterfront along the Charles.
Great. Any questions from my colleagues?
I'm just curious in terms of flood prevention. Do any other measures need to be taken to, enhance the protective value of the land, or can you just leave it as is in a natural state?
Yeah, so in terms of flood prevention, Councillor, thank you for the question. In terms of flood prevention, it does slope pretty steeply down to the river, which contains a lot of the floodwaters if the Charles was to flood at that location. So there's really no need for any other improvements to be made for flood prevention and flood control at this location. In regards to any improvements to the urban wild itself, like most urban wilds in the city, there are invasive species present, and we are controlling those through our urban wild cleanups and through maintenance that the Commission does with the Parks Department. So that's currently being maintained at this moment.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Bach?
Thank you so much. I guess the quick follow-up question I had, okay, there we go. In terms of the sharing of responsibility between the Conservation Commission and the Parks Commission, how does that work formally? In the sense that we're obviously transferring it to the Conservation Commission. I ask in the context of, we've been having lots of conversations about how, as the Parks Department grows its urban wilds portfolio, which we would like to see happen, it's also going to need, capacity to do that, even though, as you say, in some ways this is landscape that's meant to be left alone. So I'm just wondering, and as I think we all know, there are various types of property around the city that sometimes become sort of like orphan children that everyone says, well, technically it's that other guy who owns this. And so I'm just wondering what the kind of formal arrangement between conservation and parks is vis-a-vis care of a space like this.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor. So You're absolutely correct. The Conservation Commission does hold holds the majority of the urban wilds. There are a few that are owned by the Parks Department. A lot of the distinction is that any properties that are held by the Conservation Commission are held for conservation and passive recreation purposes, so no active recreation would be allowed on those properties, like a normal, typical park activities. So the arrangement that we do have is that the Urban Wilds program actually sits within the Parks Department, and Paul Sutton is the Urban Wilds program manager at Parks, and they have a budget, an annual budget that does go to maintaining all of the urban wilds, whether held by the Conservation Commission or the Parks Department, and it's a very collaborative effort. I meet with Paul many times during each month to visit our urban wilds, assess the needs of those urban wilds, whether it's tree pruning or any other type of capital project work, like what's going on at Roslindale Wetlands now. There's a capital project renovating that site at the moment. And I know in the mayor's proposed budget, there would be another capital project proposed for the Mattahunt Woods Urban Wild as well, which is another property that the commission holds.
So just to be clear, there's a difference in the use restriction. There's no difference in care and custody, like of urban wilds that are held by the Conservation Commission and those that are held by the Parks Department right now?
I don't know if that's, I don't know that that's true per se. Obviously, the ultimate care and custody of the property would fall either to the Parks Commission or to the Conservation Commission. But if they are an urban wild as identified by the city, then we are jointly responsible for their maintenance and oversight.
So you're not experiencing any difference in how those two types of property are cared for by the department right now?
That's correct.
Okay, even though maybe legally.
Yes.
Yeah, I just, it's just thinking about as we grow this portfolio, it's a little bit weird to have 2/3 of it in conservation and 1/3 of it in parks, and want to make sure that as we budget for parks going forward, we kind of have that in mind. So that's helpful to understand. And then just, I think this is a bit of a follow-up on Councilor Braden's question, but the city archives, just the fact that they're in a floodplain, obviously archives are designed to be the places you protect papers and such. Is there, what is the state of analysis on that?
So I don't believe the building itself is within the floodplain. I think it's really contained to the urban wild and the banks of the Charles, which is why this particular parcel is so important for the maintenance of that facility, so that any floodwaters, if they were to reach flood stage in the Charles, are contained to the banks.
Okay. All right, so I shouldn't be too worried about
I wouldn't be worried.
about the state of our archives, famous last words, but
You're setting off the historian flag here.
yeah, I have enjoyed my visit there, and I am hoping to go back and hoping for it not to be flooded. I guess just looking on when I click onto Google Maps, it sort of looks like 2 parcels. Historically, was this 2 parcels?
Yes, historically this has been 2 parcels, and even though the ownership has not been fully under Concom, it has been treated as the full urban wild. So we have collaboratively maintained both properties as urban wild throughout the time that it's been owned, respectively by the Commission and by the BPDA.
Great, okay. I think those are all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just to kind of really concisely summarize, moving this away from into the Concom's jurisdiction ensures that there's permanent protection and conservation. You all feel like you have the resources right now to be able to maintain it, and then this sort of completes, at least in this small segment, the need for the entire River's Edge to be protected.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Is there anything else related to this parcel that we haven't talked about or that might come up in future decisions about land use, whether it's related to the archives building or the DCR parcel or Army Corps parcel?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. We will shift to Mount Vernon Street now, the Aldrich House. So we'll throw that, and do not feel like you have to stay for this portion. We know you're very busy.
My name is Joe Portis. I'm the Director of Design Reviews for the Boston Landmarks Commission. I'm here today seeking approval of a preservation restriction on the Thomas Bailey Aldrich House located at 59 Mount Vernon Street in Beacon Hill. The Boston Landmarks Commission voted to recommend approval of this preservation restriction at a public hearing held on February 25th, 2020. Pursuant to Chapter 184, Section 32 of the Massachusetts General Laws, the City of Boston is empowered to approve preservation restrictions for historically significant structures located in the city. Approval of this preservation restriction will render it perpetual and binding on all future owners with no cost to the city. The preservation restriction is a private agreement between the restriction holder, not-for-profit, the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, doing business as Historic New England, and the property owners, Robert and Elizabeth Owens. The private preservation effort extends beyond the protection provided by the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission, as it will protect the entire exterior of the building beyond what is visible from a public way, and it will protect selected interior spaces and architectural features. And here we have an image of the exterior of the house. The Aldrich House is an ambitious example of the Greek Revival style of architecture. Constructed in 1837, the house was designed by Edward Shaw for Adam Wallace Baxter. From 1890 to 1907, the house is owned by Thomas Bailey Aldrich, editor of the Atlantic Monthly magazine. The house is a contributing property in the Beacon Hill Historic National Landmark District. By approving this restriction, the City of Boston takes no responsibility to administer or enforce it. If we go to the next slide. Here's the Greek Revival entryway from 1837. It's a very intact example of this type of architecture in the City of Boston and Beacon Hill. Next slide. And what's wonderful about this program that Historic New England offers, they're able to protect interior spaces, and that's something that the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission does not do. So in looking at this image, on the first and second stories, the woodwork, plaster, mantelpieces, and even light fixtures will be protected from alteration. And the next slide. Here's another example from looking a different direction. And the next slide. On the second floor, again, light fixtures, woodwork, door hardware. Next slide. Again, mantelpieces. And the next slide. Here's a small library. This is also protected on the second floor. Next slide. And this really wonderful staircase. The stair hall and staircase are protected from the first story all the way up through the fourth story. So it's really a very important element of Greek Revival architecture in the interior of this building, which thankfully will be protected in perpetuity through this private agreement.
Thank you. Councilor Braden?
I'm delighted to think that this wonderful building is going to be preserved, and very excited at this opportunity. So I don't have any questions at this moment.
Thank you.
I leave it to my historian friend at the other end.
Go for it. Councilor Buck.
Thank you so much. No, and also thrilled about this. It is a remarkable home, and I think, I mean, you answered a significant number of what were going to be my questions, Joe, which were, what interior aspects are we protecting? Just so I'm clear, so it's the staircase the whole way up, and then mostly rooms on the first and second floor?
Correct, yes. Kitchen areas and bathrooms aren't protected because those are areas that always get updated.
Mm-hmm, and have already been updated,
Altered,
probably,
yes.
yeah, significantly. And and it's mostly sort of everything. It's in the rooms that are protected. It's most everything fixed. Is that sort
Correct, yep. Furniture and carpeting are not protected. Paint colors are, so
Okay.
that's something, and paint removal, so if they were to strip the woodwork, they'd have to submit a detailed plan to Historic New England for its review.
And is there any historic wallpaper, or is it all paint?
Well, I think the wallpaper is reproduction.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a great concern of many of us in the historic community that we're losing these interiors at a rapid rate right now. I mean, there's just a ton of gut rehab happening, and I think we're going to look back and really miss a bunch of the features that we gave up along the way.
Agreed.
So it's great to hear this is happening, and grateful to the Owenses for taking this step. Obviously, as you said, the City of Boston doesn't have an ability to enforce it. What is the enforcement mechanism? Is it just that Historic New England could, in theory, pursue legal action, or?
Yes, so the current owner and all future owners will still need to have the approval from the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission for exterior changes visible from a public way. But they will also need approval from Historic New England for any exterior work and then any work to those protected interior spaces. And they have a similar design review application that they review internally. And to enforce it, they do have a legal reserve fund, and that enables them to go to court to defend the restriction if there is a violation in the future. But it's completely a private agreement, so it would be up to Historic New England to enforce it. And the restriction outlines the enforcement mechanism, so it would be going to court or arbitration.
And do you know how many of these Historic New England has, interior specifically?
Yes, well, if you go to the last slide, I forgot to mention, Historic New England currently has 4 preservation restrictions in the city of Boston. All Saints Church in Dorchester, Old West Church in the West End, the Charles Street Meeting House in Beacon Hill, and the 3rd Harrison Gray Otis House at 45 Beacon Street. And almost all of their more than 100 easements include interior spaces. So they usually offer entire protection of interior and exterior of buildings. They normally don't do just exteriors of buildings.
Got it, okay. And have we thought at all about, one question I had is just, since we don't have a legal enforcement role, what exactly is the role of the city in sort of accepting this?
It's really just to render it perpetual. So if the city did not approve this restriction, it would be limited to a 30-year term restriction that Historic New England would have to renew every 30 years, in 30 years and then every 10 years afterwards. So it's really, it saves them the housekeeping of sometime in the future someone forgetting to re-record the document. And I should say, I know so much about this because I worked for Historic New England and oversaw this program, so.
Great, well then, you're the perfect person to ask my next question, which is, and my last, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Which is just, I mean, have we thought at all about how to streamline this? And the reason I ask that question is because it seems to me, right, like we're losing a lot of interiors. We are not likely to extend government control to those interiors, but obviously people are entitled to put whatever restrictions they would like on their deeds before passing on a property. And I certainly think, representing, a number of residents with historic interiors, that there are folks who would do that and would, potentially give up some value in the sale in exchange for knowing that, like, as they, maybe moved on to the next stage in their life, retired, needed somewhere with no stairs. That's a common challenge in Beacon Hill, that they were protecting some of the core sort of interior elements of their home. But this seems like quite a bespoke and complex process. And so I'm just wondering whether there's any move afoot that you know of sort of on the Historic New England side and kind of in the preservation community in general to think about ways to make this like a more easy to exercise option for folks considering it.
And I do have good news that hopefully in a few months I'll be coming back. They have another restriction for a property in Bay Village with interior protection. And I really think it's word of mouth, to get word of mouth out that Historic New England has this program. They've been very reactive in their program. People contact them. They don't really go out and advertise that they do this. That being said, it is a very long process. Normally, it would take at least 6 months because of the reviews. The Mass Historic Commission also has to review these agreements in order for it to be perpetual. And I had mentioned that we started this approval project in 2020. A lot of that got derailed because of COVID and the pandemic. But 6 months is probably the shortest amount of time, but just because of the legal regulations, there are so many hoops that you have to go through and in order for it to be finalized. There's not too much you can do to speed it up any faster than that.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder if there's a way to sort of advertise it more and at least, even if it's going to take 6 months, sort of regularize it just so that people who are interested in the option find it more doable.
I think it'd be great for them and to do outreach to the real estate world for them to be aware of this, because a lot of times they're dealing with people who are downsizing and they could present that as an option as someone concerned about what might happen to the interior of the building.
Great. All right, I think those are all my questions. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Thank you, Mr. Cornish. I am happy to move, is there anything else that we should know on this that has not been discussed?
No, thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the final docket here on Hamlet Street in Dorchester.
I'm not blinking, right? Okay.
You're good.
Good morning, Madam Chair and councilors. There we go. So I'm joined here, first and foremost, Andrew Grace from the Office of Economic Development. I am the Director of Economic and Strategic Planning. I'm joined by James Smith from the Department of Neighborhood Development and Kirsten Stidlin, also from DND. We have a selection of slides here today. We'll walk you through a little bit of context about the parcel, and then Jamie will talk a little bit more specifically about the RFP. In contrast to my colleagues who are here today to talk about preservation and open space, this request for surplus entails hopefully potentially developing a parking lot. So on that note, the slide that's up in front of here reflects the context for the work that's been taking place now well over 4 years, most recently. And the parcel that we are specifically talking about today is identified as Site 2, the municipal lot. The identifiers that were given, there's actually a smaller parcel for approximately, I think it's 1,450 square feet, and then the larger parcel, they're direct to butters. It feels as though it's one parcel, but there's actually two pieces there. And then I would also mention, you can see to the lower left of the parcel, there's additional parking there, and parking behind where Brothers Supermarket and CVS is. The parking that's behind Brothers Supermarket is privately owned. However, the parking that is behind the other buildings there is actually an additional municipal parking lot, and that is not included as part of this request today. More broadly, in the context of this effort, also identified is the Strand Theater. There's another building there, the former Bank of America. There's a parking lot adjacent to that. And then across the street is a parcel that was acquired by the Land Trust Dudley Neighbors, Inc., DSNI's subsidiary. And that is a former Citizens Bank and parking lots there. And so collectively, we've been working most recently, as I said, in the past 4 years with the community. I'll get into more of these details to look at, sort of a re-energization and redevelopment of Upham's Corner with a focus on arts and innovation and development without displacement. If we can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more about the planning context. So I mentioned recently we've been working with the community for approximately 4 years, since around 2017, but it was preceded by planning that really started, I want to say, like in the early 2010s, right? Initially with the Fairmount Indigo Planning Initiative, and one of the outcomes of that, which is sometimes referred to as FITB, was the formation of the Fairmount Cultural Corridor, which was launched in July of 2012. And some of the recommendations specific to Upham's Corner included at that time this notion of an arts and innovation district and a better utilization of public parcels, and a re-examination of parking and how parking is treated in Upham's Corner more broadly. That was followed in 2016 with the Arts and Innovation study that was completed by the Office of Economic Development in consultation with the FCC and the community. And the emphasis there was really trying to put some meat on the bone regarding what exactly does arts and innovation mean, and how do we utilize, again, some of these publicly owned assets to sort of better manifest the desired outcome of that arts and innovation district. The emphasis there is certainly on the Strand Theater and eventually finding a new programming operator. And I'd say as a result of those discussions, awareness around the municipal parking lot And perhaps the underutilized asset that it is started to enter into the discussion, the broader discussion with the community. And then in 2017, the completion of Imagine Boston 2030 honed in specifically in Upham's Corner. The completion of the effort was actually launched in Upham's Corner with the announcement that the city, sort of building upon this work, had made some additional acquisitions, and then it also assisted DNI in acquiring that Citizens Bank parcel and permanently protecting it for affordable housing and affordable commercial space. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, just a last note. On the 2016 Arts and Innovation District report and that work, one of the outcomes of that was the establishment of the Fairmont Innovation Lab, Leora Beers, and partnership with FCC and Art Morpheus and such. So, the gestation, of these ideas has been some time in the making. Next slide, please. I believe I've mentioned the work with the community. The working advisory group was set up in, 2012 or 2011, I think, specifically for the Fairmont Indigo Planning Initiative. And in one form or another has continued to exist. Members of this working advisory group, which are mayorally nominated, consist of individuals from neighborhood groups, neighborhood institutions, the Upham's Corner Main Street's director, the health center. You can see the individuals on there, and the objectives, and the roles and responsibility of that advisory group are also provided on there for your review. In partnership with this advisory group, we have held a series of public meetings, charrettes, forums, most of which occurred pre-pandemic, and some of which have occurred during the pandemic. Next slide, please. I believe I may have mentioned this earlier. The vision has been sort of captured is to reignite Upham's as a hub of creative activity that boasts physical assets in close proximity to each other, linked by programmatic partnerships. And I highlighted the goals are development without displacement, the creation of affordable housing and commercial space, a reinvigorated Strand Theater, and a new Upham's Corner branch library for the Upham's Corner to become a hub of creativity, to bolster collaboration, and to foster investments that support the cultural, ethnic, and economic diversity of the community. These goals came directly out of conversations and discussions from the planning processes and from the advisory group members, and are, I'd say, the foundation for the RFPs, requests for proposals, that have been written and that Jamie will talk a little bit more about coming up. Before he does that, I just want to go to the next slide and highlight at a very high level some of the public process that has occurred since September 2017. I mentioned sessions at the Strand Theater, at the Kroc Center. We've had pop-up sessions, installations. There was a Joy Parade that took place in partnership with Arts and Culture. This is I may not have mentioned this at the beginning, this is truly an interdepartmental collaboration amongst multiple departments within City Hall. That includes the BPDA, DND, the library, Arts and Culture, and the stewardship of the Strand Theater. And I'm probably forgetting, PFD, and I think I mentioned DND as well. So just a snapshot of what had occurred pre-pandemic, and then the next slide are just capturing some of the public engagement that took place. This is a community meeting that we had. It was kind of a charrette environment at the Strand. Next. A host of different meetings. You can see some of the Imagine Boston graphics there in the background. And there's David Leonard in one corner. There's our partners in this, DSNI. Next slide, please. This was another session that we had within the CB, the former Citizens Bank building, working with the community to really shape these RFPs. Next slide, please. And one of our partners who was introduced to us, actually, Arts and Cultures had been working with them, but it really was through DS&I that we developed a relationship with DS4SI, Design Studio for Social Integration. So these are some of the graphics that were presented in one of our sessions. I think this was in late 2019 that we posted all these in anticipation of issuing an RFP. And then, of course, there were some delays along the way, and certainly the impacts of the pandemic caused things to have to pause for a little while. And I believe the next slide then captures some of the virtual engagement that occurred with both the working advisory group and then some broader community forums that occurred in November of 2020. And then most recently, we had a session in May of this year. The working advisory group, since really the fall of 2020, has met pretty regularly, and all those meetings are open to the public as well. I'd say, well, I guess on that note, why don't I pass it, because I've talked for quite some time, pass it to Jamie, who can speak to sort of where we are today, which is demarcated on June 15, 2021, and tell you a little bit about the RFP background and some of the process for that.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, councilors, Madam Chair. If this vote is approved, D&D intends to issue an RFP later on this summer. As Andrew referenced, the RFP was written and the relevant design standards and development guidelines were written in consultation with members of the WAG and other community and public stakeholders, the whole list of departments that Andrew referenced. The RFP would be issued publicly in accordance with D&D standards, and will be issued with the guidelines for affordable housing and commercial space, and to replace the existing surface parking with public parking at a 1-to-1 ratio. The RFP is anticipated to be released for approximately 2 to 3 months, during which time D&D will hold a bidders conference to allow prospective proposers the opportunity to ask questions and for D&D to issue any clarifications to the guidelines and standards in the RFP. And upon the deadline of the proposal, D&D will continue its public engagement. The public will have an opportunity to review the proposals, and the prospective proposers will have the opportunity to present their plans for the site in developer presentations. And we will solicit feedback from WAG and the community and the relevant stakeholders, and ultimately the city will select a developer based on the design guidelines and the evaluation criteria, and designated developer. And that's kind of a quick overview of the process from D&D's end.
Kirsten, do you want to add anything?
Give me.
No, I think Jamie covered it pretty well, but if you have any questions, I'm also here to answer them. So.
Thank you. Councilor Braden?
So I have a curiosity because I come from Alston Brighton, and we're thinking about an arts district for the district. So can you enlarge a little on what an arts innovation district means? Like, I know you've touched on some of it, but can you give us a snapshot of what
Sure.
that means?
I'm happy to. Thank you for the question. As it's conceived and originated in those plans that were discussed, it really builds upon the anchor of the Strand Theater. and sort of capitalizing on that asset. A component of this exercise has been, ideally the city owns that, it'll maintain ownership, but seeking a new programming operator for that is a sort of a catalyst for this. The other ingredients of this are, and this has been in the news for some time, really protecting the arts assets that are there. So Hamlet Street Studios is something that I know Chief Elliot Ortega wanted to be here today. She had a conflict. She might pop in. Something that the city has been working closely with them to try and protect that asset as well. Fairmont Innovation Lab has hopped around in a few different locations, but ideally we're hoping that they can land perhaps in one of the publicly owned parcels or in some of the adjacent developments that are there. And so the ingredients of that Arts and Innovation District are both individuals that are there and then attracting, so the Conservatory Lab Charter School, is another element of this. And I'd say the library and the investment that the city will make in a new branch library is also sort of anchored in arts components, potentially, complementary pieces that might not be able to be accommodated in the Strand per se, but much like the Nubian Square branch has elements that were done in consultation with the community, there's discussion of arts supporting and flexible spaces as part of that construction of a new facility that would foster, those types of activities. It's not a precise recipe. It is certainly, rooted in all this is not displacing anybody who is currently there. Hence we've got to find a place for Fairmont Innovation Lab. The Hamlet Street Studios, there's some things that the city can do, and we're working, with partners there. And the library and the Strand is definitely like things that are within the city's control. This parcel as well, I'd say presents a unique opportunity to, bring complementary uses. Along Hamlet Street, I'd say the discussions and the components of the RFP suggest that, housing might be located along there, and some aspects of the RFP talk about a preference for artist housing using the criteria that Arts and Culture has created, for those. And in some of the other parcels that are being contemplated, there's a strong kind of push. In some instances, it's more challenging, to say, to put a requirement on those, but a strong push towards, arts studios, flex spaces, and housing to support those. So it really emerges from the community and from the partners. This collaboration and partnership with DSNI, DS4SI, Fairmont, was seen as sort of a model for how to do development and grow neighborhoods, but not eliminate sort of this thing that makes it special.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear, I think our artist community in the city is under a lot of stress, and any initiative that we can bring forward to help them stabilize and expand our creative community is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baden. Councillor Bach?
Great, thanks so much. So I just wanted to check so it's sort of, we're asking for this spot for a combination of housing and commercial. Are we dictating anything about proportions, or are we just saying some of both?
So as the RFP is written, it's pretty flexible. One thing that Jamie highlighted that folks have made very clear is there'll be no elimination of parking, and there's the potential for an increase in parking. So there is approximately, I think, 92 spaces or so that are currently there. any new development that comes to the site will have to provide at a minimum that and potentially more. Along Hamlet Street, which is more residential in scale, what's been described in the RFP is trying to sort of reflect that scale, and then as it backs up to where the Pierce Building is and where CVS and Brothers are, there's, I'd say, more commercial scale development there that are like 4 stories, 3 and 4 stories, and so there is, I'd say what's envisioned is, a mixture of commercial space that would mimic that scale. That commercial space, could be arts supporting, could be nonprofit, arts organizations. It could be, maker space. There's a variety of different uses. It's intentionally not specific to allow for that flexibility.
And the housing component of it, we haven't put any affordability preference on that?
So as it's described in the RFP, the entire area is envisioned as a third, a third, and a third. So a third
deeply affordable, a
deeply
third
affordable,
moderate, and a third market.
A third moderate, and a third market. And even in the market component, it is envisioned, this has always been a play, not for luxury housing. So even some of the ratios that have been examined are, and I don't want to get too much into the semantics of AMI and such, but it's really trying to preserve this as an area that is accessible to, middle-income individuals.
But that's across the 3 sites, right? So, and we're only being asked as a council to act on site 2?
Correct.
Is that right? And then site 1, sorry, I think I missed this, has site 1, is that a future process? Site 3 is not under our control.
So all 3 sites have been part of the broader process. The request today is specific to parcel 3, and parcel 1 is seeking a strand operator, and then there's some
But there's a
decisions
lot.
that have to be made regarding how the library is located and what development occurs in partnership with that. So
I
that's,
see. So
that's-
it wouldn't be a disposition process. It would be, if the library were to be done with some kind of commercial or other collaboration, that would be a different,
It's being looked at as housing with public assets.
okay, so PFD.
Part of
thing.
that program.
Got it. And the spots, the parking spots, I mean, did we do any study to determine how many of them are actually used? Like, is the 90 actually
Kirsten, do you-
utilized?
Yeah, back in 2018, D&D did a study about several municipal parking lots, including this one, to look at the utilization. And overall, the utilization of this particular lot was only about 2/3 use, capacity at the most. And so that's why we, in the RFP, said that there needs to be a 1-for-1 replacement of existing spaces. Plus, any additional development is going to have to meet the zoning or other standards for parking ratios for whatever additional development is created.
So in your vision, instead of us proposing, for instance, going down to the 2/3 that's being utilized, the idea is that that extra 1/3 is sort of sitting there to absorb the potential uses that are going
Correct,
above.
because we are anticipating that, once the library is constructed and the Strand Theater has a new operator, that there's going to be parking need for those facilities too. So that's why all 3 sites have been looked at from an overall perspective in terms of how much parking is needed for the overall area.
And when we say those spots are going to be public, what is the easement or other right that we're holding?
The what?
Like, is there like an easement or something? Like, what is keeping those spots public as opposed to part of the private?
That will be determined once we're under negotiations with whatever developer is selected in terms of whether it's a sale, leaseback, or a lease to the city. It'll be some sort of arrangement where the city will have control over the parking area that's municipal, for which there's no charge, et cetera, that the city will have charge over that in some way that'll be worked out with the developer once we've selected them.
Okay, but that's how we do it is as part of the negotiation, not through kind of attaching an easement or restriction to the land as we dispose of it?
Correct.
It might well be that or be expressed that way, once a developer partner is selected.
In order to allow flexibility in
yeah.
negotiations with the developer and determine the best structure at the time, that's the way that we are intending to do that.
And what's the zoning height of this parcel?
I
I'm trying to think
don't
if
know
I
off
have
the top
the
of my
slide.
head, sorry.
It's like a residential commercial. I apologize. I do not have that in front of me right now.
It's part of the
we can get back to you on
Dorchester
that.
Neighborhood Overlay District, but I don't know off the top of my head the
Yeah.
height limit for this particular parcel, but I can find out and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, it would be helpful to know, I think we all know that sometimes there's a distance between what we have written down in zoning and where some of our planning processes, including community-led ones like these, have taken things, and it would just be helpful to understand how what we as a city are RFPing on the site differs or matches what we have sort of as existing zoning permissions there. That'd be useful to know. Okay, I think, I think obviously, you guys have been engaged in a very in-depth community process, and I'm mindful of being the counselor for District 8, so defer to that but just want to make sure that we're, that we're just keeping all the right kind of, if we're gonna put this out because we have a very particular community determined goal, then we got to make sure we've got, the right hooks to make sure that what we actually want to have happen comes to pass, and also that we've set it up so that what we want to have happen is possible, right? So just asking on that front, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. So along those lines, could you send a copy of the draft RFP or the finalized RFP to the council?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. And I'll read it when it comes to, but within that, are there provisions for how the selection will be made? How much of a role does the advisory group have in that relative to D&D, or who's the ultimate decision maker?
Yes, it does have those provisions, and ultimately it's the Department of Neighborhood Development. The advisory group makes a recommendation to the city, and the city, after financial review, a whole number of aspects, ultimately makes the final selection.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to share that RFP or the draft RFP when it comes. And when you said this summer it will likely go out?
We're waiting for this action that would enable us to then commence the process. So it is entirely dependent on this, but it should be issued probably within weeks.
Got it. Well, I know in the past we've pushed for the council surplusing vote to happen later in the process, to have RFPs go out and the decision made. I think in some ways, ultimately, if the surplusing decision, and we can talk about this separately, but just as a principle, I think if the council vote is meant to incorporate as much democratic accountability into the very serious decisions where we are giving away or selling off, disposing of public land, to have a full sense of what actually will be on that site. We've been in this situation again and again and again where, best of intentions are communicated, this happens, and then it ends up, in Winthrop Street Garage, Winthrop Square Garage, et cetera. So just something to keep in mind, and I know a lot of process has gone into this ahead of time, different from some of those other situations, but I want to make sure to vocalize that too.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from colleagues before we close? Great. Thank you everyone so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We will take these dockets under advisement, and this will conclude the Planning, Development, and Transportation Committee's hearing on dockets 0102, 0103, and 0389. This hearing is adjourned.